Though it's interesting that they're really not denying that it happened. I mean, I think in both of these instances, both the Wall Street Journal story and the New York Times story, the reporting is so good that they can't really deny that it happened. Instead, their defense, I guess, has to be, yeah, it happened, but so what? I mean, with reporting this good, the Trump campaign defense, the White House defense, basically has to be that, yeah, this stuff happened, but there's nothing wrong with what they did. They're not embarrassed by it. This behavior is totally fine. All these meetings with Russians and contacts with Russians throughout the campaign, nothing to be embarrassed about. They're totally on the up and up. The problem with that as their defense is that if that were the case, you would expect them to have been totally upfront about all of their Russian meetings, all of their Russian contacts from the very beginning.
Are there any ties between Mr. Trump, you or your campaign, and Putin and his regime?
No, there are not. It's absurd, and there's no basis to it.
Did anyone involved in the Trump campaign have any contact with Russians trying to meddle with the election?
Absolutely not.
I'm asking you a direct question. Was there any contact in any way between Trump or his associates and the Kremlin or cutouts they had?
I joined this campaign in the summer, and I can tell you that all the contact by the Trump campaign and associates was with the American people.
Whether there were any contacts, sir, I'm just trying to get an answer.
Yeah, of course not. Why would there be any contacts?
I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Did any advisor or anybody in the Trump campaign have any contact with the Russians who were trying to meddle in the election?
Oh, of course not.
Can you say whether you are aware that anyone who advised your campaign had contacts with Russia during the course of the election?
Well, I told you, General Flynn obviously was dealing, so that's one person, but he was dealing as he should have been.
During the election?
No, nobody that I know of.
Those conversations never happened. I hear people saying it like it's a fact on television. That is just not only inaccurate and false, but it's dangerous.
Does the president-elect...
And it does undermine our democracy.
What's that about undermining our democracy? This latest reporting about a Kremlin-linked lawyer meeting during the campaign with Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort. This is, on the one hand, just the latest in what is now an incredibly long string of meetings and contacts between people in the Trump campaign and Russian officials during the campaign and during the transition, meetings that were all denied, none of which were initially disclosed until the press figured them out one by one, and then, oh yeah, one by one, they've admitted to each of them one by one. Oh yeah, I forgot that one too. Oh yeah, I forgot that one too. But in addition to that, this new reporting really does include an explicit admission from the president's son, who was acting as a campaign official, that when the Trump campaign learned that Russians had launched a hacking attack against the United States to try to influence the outcome of our election, the Trump campaign response to that at the highest levels was, how can we get in on that? To see what the Trump campaign might be able to get out of that sweet, sweet foreign attack on the United States. At the beginning of this saga, there were so many mysteries, so many intriguing questions that we now have answers to. We now have answers to what were kind of the worst and most damning of those questions. We knew about the Russian attack. We knew the Trump campaign was denying any contacts with Russians. There was this interesting question as to whether or not it was possible that any American, let alone anybody connected to the Trump campaign, might have been aware of, let alone involved with, let alone supportive of that Russian attack. We've now got answers to those questions. And honestly, it is now, therefore, no longer a question of whether they did it. It's just a question of what's going to happen now that we know that, now that they are admitting it. And let me add this, just within the last couple of minutes, and we're going to have more on this in just a second, just in the last couple of minutes, the New York Times has published an addendum to this story. I'm just going to read you the lead of this, okay? Just to put the cherry on top of this. Before arranging a meeting with a Kremlin-connected Russian lawyer he believed would offer him compromising information about Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump Jr. was informed in an email that the material he was going to get about Hillary Clinton was part of a Russian government effort to aid his father's candidacy. The email to the younger Mr. Trump was sent by Rob Goldstone, who helped broker that June 2016 meeting. Mr. Goldstone's message, as described to the New York Times by 3 people, indicates explicitly that the Russian government was the source of the potentially damaging information. So ahead of that meeting, they knew it was the Russian government. ahead of that meeting, the president's son, according to this new reporting, was informed, hey, the Russian government has dirt on Hillary Clinton. And apparently the response to that was,